Good evening to everybody. So let's start with the first session of the Young Seminar of the Italian Society for Statistical Physics of this new year. And the first speaker is Giulia Garcia Lorenzana. Giulia got her bachelor in physics in Rome at La Sapienza, working on Fano-Feshbach resonances. Then she moved in Paris to get a master in theoretical physics at École Normale Supérieure, and she's still there doing a PhD in physics under the supervision of Giulio Biroli and Ada Altieri, and on spatial extended many species heterogeneous ecosystems. And today, Giulia is going to give a talk with the title Emergent Bistability and Mutualistic Behavior, How Interactions and Disorder Rescue Diverse Ecosystems from Extinctions. Please, Giulia, you have 25 minutes.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Do you see the presentation?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for the introduction and also for this opportunity to present this recent work that I did with my PhD advisors, Giulio Biroli and Ada Altieri. In general, in my PhD, I'm focusing on how we can apply the methods of statistical physics to the study of theoretical community ecology, so the study of systems in which we have a very large number of species that interact. If we start with just two interacting species, for example, a predator and a prey, we can write, for example, some ordinary differential equations describing the evolution of the size of the two populations. And with methods from dynamical systems, we can, for example, understand why, if we look at how the size of the populations or abundance changes over time, they show these periodical oscillations. Nevertheless, we are often interested in ecosystems that have a very large number of species. One example is planktonic communities, but also human microbiome. If we in this data set you see here, these researchers collected some samples of seawater each day for 90 days. And they sampled everything they found. And here you see the relative abundance of each of the taxonomic units, that is the equivalent of species for planktonic communities over time. And you see that they found 50,000 different taxonomic units. So in a system like this, it's not possible to hope to describe analytically what happens to each of the species. And since studying this type of ecosystems corresponds to studying the evolution of a very large number of degrees of freedom, this is something that we can hope to do with the tools of statistical physics. The reason we think that statistical physics really can have something to bring to this field is also the fact that often we find that very different ecosystems share some emergent properties, and this makes us think that these collective properties do not depend too much on the details of the realization of the ecosystem, and so there is some sort of universality, like we like to think in statistical physics. Since these ecosystems often have very heterogeneous interactions, what we can try to do is to sample these interactions randomly. In this way, of course, we cannot hope to understand anything about the behavior of one single species, because we have randomly extracted its characteristics, but we can answer questions about the ecosystem as a whole. So, for example, how is this incredible diversity that we see in natural ecosystems maintained? How does this complexity affect the stability of the ecosystems? Does the system exhibit a single or multiple equilibria, or does it even have chaotic dynamics? And how does the presence of a spatial structure influence all of these questions? So in the following, I'm going to consider a random Lotka-Volterra model that describes the interaction, the dynamics of S interacting species, and we will be focused on the limit, on the thermodynamic limit in which the number of species S goes to infinity. The system is defined by these dynamical equations for the evolution of the abundance Ni of each of the S species. We see that each species has a growth rate that is composed of two terms. One that describes the self-regulation of each species, and is due to the fact that in the system there are a finite amount of resources, and so even if the species is left alone, it will not grow indefinitely, but it will its abundance, so the size of its population, would saturate to a carrying capacity K. The second term is the one that describes the interaction of our species I with other species. And we see that if the coefficient alpha ij is positive, the presence of species j decreases the growth rate of species I, so j is detrimental to I, whereas if alpha ij is negative, the presence of j is beneficial to I. So if we consider the different possible cases that we can have, if both alpha ij and alpha ji are positive, it means that well, this could come, for example, from the fact that the two species are competing for some resource, as it is the case, for example, for different plant species that compete for light in this image. If both coefficients are negative, it means that both species benefit from one another, and this is, for example, the case for species in a mutualistic relationship, as it is the case for plants and pollinators. And if alpha ij and alpha ji have opposite signs, we can think that this comes from a predator-prey relationship. As I said, we want to consider random interactions, and we are going to consider the distributions of the interactions with a mean, a variance, and a covariance between off-diagonal elements that scale with the inverse of the number of species S in order to have a well-defined thermodynamical limit. This system was investigated by recently by these two papers, and they found the phase diagram as a function of the mean of the interaction mu and the heterogeneity that is characterized by sigma. When the heterogeneity sigma is low, there is a single stable equilibrium. So here you have the time evolution of all the abundances of the species Ni, and you see that each of them relaxes to some asymptotic value. And this, if starting with different initial conditions, they will still go to the same asymptotic value. If we instead consider higher heterogeneity sigma, we can have two different behaviors, either multiple equilibria or chaotic dynamics, as you see in this figure. In the following, I'm going to focus on the low heterogeneity case in which there is only a single equilibrium. In addition to this deterministic dynamic for our ecological community, we also want to consider some demographic fluctuations to model the fact that in natural systems there is some stochasticity coming from the fact that birth and death events are random. To model this stochasticity, we will consider a white noise with some variance that defines an effective temperature T. These demographic fluctuations can lead the species to extinctions, and since this is an irrecoverable condition, so we can think of this as an absorbing boundary condition. In this system so far, the only real stationary state will be the one in which all species are extinct. In order to prevent this from happening, we can consider, instead of a single ecological community, as you see here, we can take a network of local ecological communities coupled by migration. So now in each circle, there is the same ecological dynamics that I described before, with also the demographic fluctuations, but the abundance, in addition to having a species index I, has also a space index U, and individuals from a species can migrate from one location to another with a diffusion constant D. This provides an insurance effect, because if one species goes extinct in patch U, for example, individuals from the neighboring patch V can reinvade patch U and restore its diversity. And if we take the limit in which the number of sites goes to infinity, this can allow us to have a balance between the extinctions and these recolonizations, and so to obtain a non-trivial steady state. If we look more closely at the equation that we have obtained so far, and we forget for a second about interaction between different species, what we have is exactly the Langevin equation that we would obtain from coarse graining of a directed percolation process. Here you have a graphical representation of directed percolation on a linear array of 7 sites. Each site can be either occupied by a particle indicated in orange or empty. At each time step, each particle can produce an offspring in a neighboring site. It can self-annihilate, or it can just survive. If we, instead of considering just 7 sites, we go to the thermodynamical limit, we have that the system exhibits 2 distinct phases. One in which at long times a finite fraction of the sites is occupied by a particle, and one in which all particles self-annihilate. In between, there is a continuous phase transition, in the sense that the fraction of sites that is occupied by a particle at long times goes to 0 continuously when we cross this line d0 of t. This is the phase diagram as a function of the strength of the demographic fluctuations t and the diffusion constant d. If we now reintroduce interactions between different species, what we have is the collection of an infinite number of coupled directed percolation processes. In the case of constant positive interactions, this was already studied by Denk and Alacek, who found that the behavior is exactly the same. So there is a survival and an extinction phase and a continuous phase transition in between. So our question is, what happens in the case of random interactions? In order to tackle this problem, we resorted to a double dynamical mean field theory. The first step is to take the limit in which the number of species S goes to infinity. And in this case, we can replace the term that describes interaction between different species with a stochastic quantity that we will impose to have the same statistical properties as the term we started with. It has 3 contributions, so one describing the average interaction, one describing the fluctuation of the interaction, and a memory term. You see that all 3 contributions contain some quantity that has to be computed as an average over the process, and these averages need to be computed in a self-consistent way. The second step is to take also the limit in which the number of spatial locations L goes to infinity. And in this case, this allows us to replace the empirical average over neighbors that appears in the diffusion term with a thermal average. And this amounts to introducing an additional parameter that has to be determined self-consistently. In this way, we managed to obtain an effective dynamics for a single species in a single site, plus some self-consistency conditions that are in general quite hard to solve. So in general, this can only be done numerically, except if we if we restrict ourselves to only considering symmetric interactions. In this case, we can show that we can write the equilibrium probability distribution in terms of a Boltzmann weight with an effective Hamiltonian that we can write down explicitly. And this allows us to compute all the averages we need and to close the problem. So in the following, we are going to make this assumption, but we can then show in perturbation theory and numerically that if we, instead of considering exactly symmetric interactions, we take a small asymmetry, this should not change, at least qualitatively, our results. So the first result is that if we take strong enough diffusion, this works. So we managed to find a phase in which the ecosystem is able to survive. Here you have the average abundance and the fraction of surviving species or diversity phi as a function of the diffusion constant and the temperature. The dotted lines are the results at zero temperature. So you see that the diffusion is beneficial to the ecosystem since it increases both the average abundance and the diversity, whereas the demographic fluctuations are detrimental to the survival of the ecosystem. If we continue to decrease the diffusion constant, at some point we encounter a phase transition, as it was the case for the case without interactions. When the temperature or the strength of demographic fluctuations is quite high, what we find is that this transition is continuous, and it occurs at the same value of the diffusion constant at which we will have the transition without interactions, so d0 of t. This can be understood because when the abundance goes to zero, the interactions that are quadratic in the abundance become completely irrelevant. And this also means that we exactly recover the directed percolation universality class, as it was also found in the case of constant interactions by Denk and Dalacek. At lower temperature, instead, the behavior is quite different. We have that the transition becomes discontinuous, and it occurs at a lower value of the diffusion constant than the one at which we will have the transition in the case of constant interactions or zero interactions, that will be d0 of t. This means that there is this extended region of parameter space in which the survival of the ecosystem is only possible thanks to the heterogeneity in the interaction network. In this region, actually, this finite solution that you see here is only bistable. And this means that if we start from high values of d, we decrease the diffusion constant and then we increase it again, the average abundance performs this hysteresis cycle. Well, this is quite different behavior from what happens in the case of classical directed percolation. This is the phase diagram that we find in the blue and orange arrows represent the parameters used to generate these two plots. So we see that you see that as before we have a survival and an extinction state, but in addition we also have this metastability gray region here. The existence of this continuous transition is really a problem if we want to somehow control the behavior of this ecosystem. So, for example, if we want to avoid the collapse of the ecosystem, because the most accessible observable is in general the average abundance, and if we were here, for example, we will think, well, the average abundance is quite high. The ecosystem is doing well, I don't need to do anything. And instead we are quite close to this tipping point here at which the ecosystem is going to collapse. And then it's going, we are going to have to work very hard to because of the hysteresis, to allow the ecosystem to recover and go back to its abundant state. What we showed is that one way to predict the fact that we are approaching this tipping point, that is what in physics we will call the spinodal, is to look at the response of the system to perturbation that, as would be expected for a spinodal, diverges when we approach this point. In order to confirm that this behavior is also found in the case for a finite number of species and for a finite number of sites, we perform some numerical simulations that show indeed that at high temperature we have a continuous phase transition. In green, you see the result of simulations starting with initial conditions of order 1, and in red with initial conditions of order 0.1. And so you see that at high temperature, there is no strong dependence on initial conditions. At lower temperature, instead, the transition becomes discontinuous, and in this region, you see there is a very strong dependence on initial conditions. We also considered some extensions of our model. We can consider, instead of the same interaction network in each spatial location, we can consider a slight variation of the interaction network. This could make sense, especially if the interactions come from competition for resources, in which case the availability of a certain resource in a certain place could change and affect the interaction network. And we also considered some asymmetry in the interaction network, so alpha ij not exactly equal to alpha ji. And introducing these changes in the numerical simulations, we see again that at high temperature the transition is continuous, whereas at low temperature we have this region in which there is a strong dependence on initial conditions. So how can we explain this peculiar behavior? Well, a similar discontinuous phase transition is actually found in the case of mutualistic interactions, so for species that help each other, as it is the case for plants and pollinators. The idea is that in this case, by collaborating, species are able to survive in very harsh conditions, in which each of them in isolation will go extinct. Nevertheless, if the conditions keep getting harder, at some point this mechanism is not sufficient anymore, and there is a sudden collapse of the entire ecosystem. In our case, this is not exactly what happens, because the interaction network we start with is not mutualistic, in the sense that the average interaction is positive. That signals rather competition for resources than mutualism. Nevertheless, a finite fraction of the species goes extinct during the dynamics, and the ones that interact in a more mutualistic way are favored by this dynamics, which means that in the surviving community, the interactions will be more mutualistic than in the community we started with. And so it is this mutualism that enables the survival of the ecosystem in these harsh conditions, but it also leads to this fragile metastable state. So in conclusion, I showed that there is this competition between demographic fluctuations that leads to extinctions and diffusion that allows for recolonizations. And this competition leads to a phase transition between a survival and an extinction state. For this phase transition, we have two distinct regimes. When fluctuations dominate, so at a high temperature, or when the heterogeneity in the interaction network is not very strong, the transition is continuous and it falls in the directed percolation universality class. Instead, when it is the heterogeneity that dominates, the transition becomes discontinuous, and we have hysteresis, we have this divergence of the response, and in general, this is these are behaviors that go beyond the classical directed percolation framework. The mechanism for this is the presence of heterogeneity in the interaction network allows for the selection of a surviving community that is more mutualistic than average. This allows for the survival of the ecosystem beyond the single species extinction threshold, but also makes the ecosystem much more fragile. Here are some things I'm working on right now. So considering finite dimensional spatial networks, whereas for the moment we mostly focused on fully connected networks, considering stronger asymmetry in the interactions, so going beyond the perturbation theory, and considering this very interesting strong heterogeneity regime in which we can have multiple equilibria with glassy behavior and very complicated features, or chaotic dynamics. So if you want to know something more about all of this, you can read our recent archive. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Giulia. Thank you. So, are there questions, comments? Okay, first of all, I
have one. Paolo.
Sì, vai.
Very interesting seminar. Can you repeat me, please, what is the definition of your effective Hamiltonian that appeared at a certain point, and where it comes from exactly?
Yes, I'll share again. Do you see my screen again?
Yes.
So the effective Hamiltonian is something like this. We actually obtain so we can obtain it directly from we can write the Fokker-Planck equation and just show that in a slightly different case, we can write the Fokker-Planck equation and explicitly show that there is a stationary probability distribution that we can write as a Boltzmann weight with this effective Hamiltonian. So it really comes just from looking at the stationary probability distribution
in the mean field approximation, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is independent on the fact that you choose symmetric or asymmetric matrix.
No, this is only for symmetric. You can write an effective Hamiltonian only for symmetric interactions. Actually,
okay.
Yes, because otherwise, non-symmetric interactions correspond to non-conservative forces. So you,
of course,
you cannot. You cannot write it in this way. For symmetric interactions, you can really show that the system behaves as an equilibrium system, and so you have a fluctuation dissipation theorem. You have everything you need.
But this is true also in the region where you have multistability and chaotic behavior.
Well, in that case, so chaotic behavior you can only have with non-symmetric interactions. With symmetric interactions, you end up having in you obtain this multiple equilibria phase that is basically a spin glass phase.
It's like in the Hopfield model, more or less. Huh?
Yes, it's yeah. So here you wouldn't have this sort of behavior, but you would have glassy relaxation. So it's actually a Gardner phase. So full replica symmetry broken.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? I have a very short question in slide 4.
Okay. Okay.
In the definition of your model, why the constant k is I independent?
You can also make it I independent. This was just for simplicity. We actually usually take it to be 1. So, but you can show that it does not.
You can rescale.
yes, you can either rescale everything, or you can, but you can also show that it, yeah, in any case, it doesn't really change the behavior and the phase diagram.
Okay, and the curiosity, because I mean, in certain limit, your model enters in the universality class of directed percolation. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, when you study directed percolation, I mean, we know that if we change some relevant parameter like the number of absorbing state or some symmetry conservation law, we can fall in other universality classes of percolation, dynamical percolation, compact percolation, other. Does it happen something similar in your type of models, that in certain cases you may have other universality class of percolation which is not the directed one?
So we're actually thinking about that as well at the moment. So basically, the equation that we obtain at the end of dynamical mean field theory are also, we can do it also in infinite dimension. We don't need to do basically we take we need the network to be fully connected only in order to do this step, but we can write an equation for a single species on any spatial network. The fact that we have that we originally had a very well, an infinite number of species instead of one appears in this noise term. Basically, this is the most important contribution. And well, when you study directed percolation, you find out that an environmental noise in general is an irrelevant perturbation. So it should not change the universality class. The problem here is that we have this subconsistency condition that makes so that basically this noise becomes critical at criticality. So it can develop some long-range correlations when we approach a phase transition, and so this could indeed change the universality class. This is something that we are thinking about right now for one dimension or for finite dimensions.
Okay, thank you very much. So if there are no other comments or questions, okay, let's thank Giulia again. Thank you very much.